that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. Hello. That's the chorus of the song we're going to do now. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. It's a story about a little man called William Brown. Let's hear what happens to him. A nice young man named William Brown worked for a wage in a northern town. He worked from 6 till 8 at night, turning the wheel from left to right. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. The boss one day to William came. He said, look here, what's your name? We're not content with what you do. Work a bit harder or out you go. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. So William turned and he made a run 3 times round in the time of 1. He turned so hard he soon was made the Lord High Turner of his trade. Keep that wheel a-turning, try it. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. William turned with the same sweet smile. The goods he made grew such a pile. He filled the room and the room next door, and overflowed in the basement floor. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. The nation heard the wondrous tale. The news appeared in the sketch and the mail. Railways ran excursions down just to see young William Brown. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. Sad the sequel is to tell. He turned out more than the boss could sell. The market slumped and the price went down. 7 more days and they sat young Brown. Keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, keep that wheel a-turning, and we'll do a little more each day. There we are, that's called Keep That Wheel a-Turning. I hope you joined in the chorus there. Right, today I'm wondering whether we could probably be sensible. Do you think you could be sensible, Rat? Well, I knew you would say that. What about Crocodile? Do you think he could be sensible just for once? Yeah, all right, Rod. I could be sensible, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I brought down my picture off the wall of this lovely sailing boat. It's called a 3-masted bark. It has got 3 masts on it. You might not be able to see it from where you are. 1, 2, 3. And it's sailing past a lighthouse. Now that lighthouse there is called the Needles Lighthouse. Needles Lighthouse is on the Isle of Wight. And that beautiful bark sailing past under full sail. What do you think ships in those days were made out of? I think you're right. Wood. They were. They were made of wood. Wooden masts, wooden hull. But the sails were made of canvas. Okay? They didn't have a motor. If the wind stopped blowing, then your ship stopped moving. And if the wind blew too hard, it could blow you onto the rocks. You see those wicked rocks there? That's why there's a lighthouse. Stop the ship going on it. So many ships were wrecked. I've got some pictures here of actual shipwrecks that happened around England, mainly in Cornwall, where the rocks there are like dragon's teeth. They're very sharp. These pictures were taken by a photographer about 150 years ago. They're real ships, and they really ended up on the rocks. I'll have a quick look, shall we? Have you noticed how beautiful they are? I always think that the sailing ship was probably one of the most beautiful things that men ever made. See? All of them had sails, and they were all blown onto the shore in storms. Sometimes people manage to get ashore, other times I'm afraid they drowned. It's a lovely one. That's interesting, that one, isn't it? Can you see what's happening? There's a man in what looks like a lifebelt, what's called a breeches buoy, and he's being rescued from the ship with that big long line. What the rescuers do is they fire a rocket onto the ship, and they tie it fast, and then they put the breeches buoy on the wire, and people swing down it to safety. This is a picture of a wreck. It's not a photograph. This is the picture of the Schiller. It was a ship that was coming from New York in 1875, and it hit the rocks near the Bishop's Rock lighthouse, and 300 people were drowned. 300 people. So you see, lighthouses were very, very important. The first one didn't look anything like a lighthouse. Here it is. This was designed by a man who made clocks, a clockmaker called Winstanley. And he wanted his lighthouse on the Eddystone Rocks to look posh, with all sorts of things hanging off it. Well, it did for a couple of weeks, and then there was a storm. And the next morning, everybody looked out, no lighthouse, no Winstanley. It's just been washed away. Lighthouses have to be strong, like this one. This is called the Wolf Rock Lighthouse, and it's a long way away from land. When you're on this lighthouse, you can't see the coast, especially if it's a bit misty. Can you see how that wave is hitting it and then curling up? Very strong. That lighthouse has been there for 200 years and it's still as good as new. But there are no keepers on it. There are no keepers on any lighthouse now. This lighthouse is called Bishop's Rock. Bishop's Rock Lighthouse. That's a lot taller than Wolf Rock. If you look very carefully with a magnifying glass, you will see me. You will see me, because I was on Bishop's Rock Lighthouse a long time ago now. Let's have a story about a lighthouse keeper. Now, it's called The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. And I just want to say one thing before I read it, that the man who wrote this story was a good drawer and a good storyteller, but he didn't know anything about lighthouses. Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night time he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime, he rode out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. There's his cottage, and there's... Notice that lighthouse is painted red and white, and the one on the Needles that we saw early, painted red and white. That means so you can see them, you see. Mr. Grinling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Sometimes at night, as Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed, the ships would toot to tell him that his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Now, lighthouse keepers don't do that. They stay on the lighthouse all the time. They don't come ashore and just leave it burning. But like I said, the man that wrote the story didn't know much about lighthouse. Each morning, while Mr. Grinling polished the light, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen. She concocted a delicious lunch for him. Once she prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. Convenient. Oh gosh, look, this is his lunch. I'm not sure that's too much food for one person. One Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetising lunch. She had made a mixed seafood salad, lighthouse sandwiches, cold chicken garni, sausages and crisps, peach surprise, iced sea biscuits, and drinks and assorted fruit. Cool. That would last me a whole week, I think. She put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch didn't arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Oh, you clear off, you varmints!" shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. Listen what they're saying. "Ah, this is an excellent peach surprise, boys. She's a great cook, Fred. Scrumptious lunch, Tom." Oh. Have you ever been to the seaside and tried to eat a bag of chips when there are seagulls around? You know what I mean. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Well, tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Grinling. "A sound plan. But look, the seagulls are just taking the napkin off. They'll have to try harder than this to stop us, Bird." They will, but they do. On Tuesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling rocked their brains for another plan. "Oh, they're a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "I'm brazen indeed," said Mr. Grinling. "What shall we do?" "Our cat does not appear to like seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "No, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch." "Most ingenious plan," agreed Mr. Grinling. "I think Hamish has got other ideas of that." Hamish didn't think that this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him in the basket. There, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling consolingly. "I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." Sadly, Flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed, his whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. "Pretty pussy like a piece of lobster morning. Course food gets better every day, Fred. Aren't you going to chase us, pussy?" Oh, they're being unkind. Lack a day, said Mr. Grinling sadly. Meow, meow, agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. Well, what shall we do? Said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. I have it, she exclaimed. Just the mixture for hungry seagulls. Indeed, my dear, said Mr. Grinling. What have you got in mind? Wait and see, said Mrs. Grinling. Just wait and see. Poor old Hamish for hiding in the cupboard. Don't blame him. Mustard sandwiches, chuckled Mrs. Grinling. Ah, truly superb plan, my dear. Truly superb. Mustard is hot. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Yuck! Oh! They don't like that. On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. Why, Bob, let's go and have lunch elsewhere. It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred. So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pot before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. Oh, he's looking out. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. Can you see that the 3 seagulls have gone to the man in the boat who's angling? No mustard in this lot, Tom. Aye, this is a luscious chocolate eclair, Fred. You will fly back here for lunch again tomorrow, boys. I wonder if they did. Oh, well, such is life, mused Mr. Grinling as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. Another big lunch. That was a nice story. Let's have a quick tune before we have a song to finish. It's not a sea tune. It's a Morris tune. Listen. That was called Jockey to the Fair. When sailors went on board their ship, they didn't have suitcases on wings. They had these. These are sea chests. Everything they owned was in their sea chest. And they had to make their own handles themselves out of rope. And they had to try and do the best one. Can you see how many different kinds of loops? It's all made out of rope, all twisted. And the sea chests, can you see how sturdy they are? They've got great thick pieces of wood on them, because they had to be thrown up onto the deck, and you didn't want to get the contents damaged. There we are. This is a very unusual book. It's all about the knots that sailors tie. There's so many knots. You wouldn't believe how many knots there are. There we are. Sailors also believed in good luck and bad luck. They were called superstitious, right? Certain things that they would have to do on ship to bring them good luck. For instance, they didn't like anybody whistling on a ship. I wouldn't get on very well on a ship, because it was told if you whistled, you're whistling up for the wind. They didn't like that. And they didn't like going to sea on a Friday, because a Friday was like Good Friday. That wasn't a very nice day. And also they kept in their ear one gold earring, not two. Only they didn't have it in their ear as a fashion accessory. They had it in their ear in case they were drowned and their body was washed up on the beach. So anybody who found them would use the gold earring to make a decent burial for the poor old sailor. Okay. Another thing that they thought was bad luck was seeing a mermaid. Now, mermaids don't really exist, but sailors thought they did. This is a song which has two things in it that sailors thought was bad luck. Sailing on a Friday and seeing a mermaid. Let's hear what happens to the ship then. On Friday morn, when we set sail, and the ship not far from the land, we there did spy pretty maid with a comb and a glass in her hand, with a comb and a glass in her hand, while the raging sea did roar. Stormy winds did blow, and we jolly sailor boys were up aloft, and the land lubbers lying down below, and the land lubbers lying down below. Then up spoke our little cabin boy, and the fair lad was he. I've a father and mother in Bristol town, and tonight they will weep for me, and tonight they will weep for me. Then up spoke the captain of our ship, and a brave old man was he. I've got a wife in fair Portsmouth town, and tonight she a widow will be, and tonight she a widow will be. Then 3 times round went our gallant ship, 3 times round went she, for the love of a lifeboat they all went down, and she sank to the bottom of the sea, and she sank to the bottom of the sea. Last chorus. While the raging seas did roar, stormy winds did blow, and we jolly sailor boys were up aloft, and the land lubbers lying down below, and the land lubbers lying down below. That's called The Mermaid. See you again next time, and remember, always be yourself. Unless you can be a pirate, there'll always be a pirate.